As I mentioned in the last video of this series, the 4th century was certainly a century of giants for the Christian Church. In this video, we'll be taking a look not only at a few significant events that occurred in the second half of the 4th century, that is the years 350 to 400, but also in the course of looking over that history, we'll look at the life, work, and impact of some of these giants of Christianity. Perhaps the most important event of the second half of the 4th century was the life, short reign, and violent death of Julian, a nephew of St. Constantine the Great and the last pagan Roman emperor. Although he had been born and raised as a Christian, Julian secretly converted to paganism in 351. Because of his abandonment of Christianity in favor of the old gods, history remembers Julian as the apostate. 10 years after his secret conversion, Julian the Apostate became Emperor of Rome, largely through happenstance. St. Constantine's son and successor, Constantius II, appointed Julian as Caesar or Junior Emperor in 355, in order to allow Julian to lead an army against the barbarians in Gaul. In 360, Constantius II, no longer having need of Julian's services, attempted to remove Julian from this position. Julian's soldiers reacted by proclaiming Julian to be co-Augustus, or senior emperor, along with Constantius. Constantius died before he had time to react to this proclamation. In 361, Julian, now sole Roman emperor, publicly confessed his conversion to paganism. Although he did not renew outright persecution of Christians, he enacted several laws meant to subtly undermine the Christian Church, and was more than happy to look the other way or offer only light punishments when his fellow pagans did decide to exercise violence against Christians. He also attempted to reform paganism in order to make it more palatable to Romans, who had begun to embrace the Christian Church, its theology, and especially its morality. Amongst his projects to this end were attempts to create essentially a pagan church with bishops overseeing certain areas as in the Christian Church. He also tried to create pagan philanthropic programs like those of the Church. Lacking the theological basis upon which Christian morality is built, this venture quickly ended in failure. In June of 363, after a reign only about a year and a half long, Julian the Apostate was killed during a battle with the Persians. Some ancient sources record that his final words were an exclamation directed to Christ, "You have conquered, O Galilean." While there would be further disputes between pagans and Christians for years to come, the death of Julian the Apostate closed the era of the reign of paganism once and for all. Never again would a worshipper of the old gods ascend the imperial throne of Rome. By 391, the Emperor Theodosius had officially banned pagan sacrifices, and as a result, the various pagan cults ceased to function openly, and pagan temples all over the Roman Empire closed their doors for the last time. At the same time that the Christian Church was winning these victories over paganism, it was also finally defeating the heresy of Arianism. St. Athanasius of Alexandria, Pope of Alexandria for most of the 4th century, was the greatest opponent of Arianism in the Church. He spent nearly his entire term as bishop in Alexandria combating the Arian heresy, and as a result was exiled from and returned to his see no less than 5 times. Because of his persistence and diligence, he saved the Church from the heresy of Arianism, earning the title by which the Church remembers him to this day, Saint Athanasius the Great. After Athanasius' death in 373, 3 men, 2 of them brothers and the third a close friend of the brothers, picked up the torch in the fight against Arianism. These men were Saints Basil of Caesarea, Gregory of Nyssa, and Gregory of Nazianzus, remembered by the Church as the 3 Cappadocian Fathers, after Cappadocia, the region from which they hailed. When the Arians switched tactics in the second half of the 4th century and began attacking the full divinity of the Holy Spirit in addition to that of the Son, it was these men who stepped up to defend the Orthodox faith. When the Emperor Theodosius called the Second Ecumenical Council in Constantinople in 381 to address this new version of Arianism, the bishops gathered at the council quickly declared in favor of the Orthodox apostolic faith against Arianism, largely due to the work already done by the Cappadocian Fathers in refuting the heresy. The Second Ecumenical Council, in defeating Arianism once and for all, issued the final version of the Nicene Creed, which is still recited in Orthodox churches all over the world today, just as the Fathers proclaimed it in 381. Perhaps the foremost amongst the three Cappadocian Fathers was St. Basil of Caesarea. St. Basil not only produced the writing called On the Holy Spirit, which exerted perhaps the greatest influence on the Fathers of the Second Ecumenical Council, he also wrote many other books on Christian theology, practice, and morals, as well as science and history, which were to be great influences on Christian thought in all centuries since. He also standardized and shortened the Divine Liturgy, the Eucharistic service performed especially on Sunday mornings in the Christian Church. The liturgy he composed is still in use in the Orthodox Church today. In addition, St. Basil wrote the Order Manual for monastic communities, upon which nearly all modern monasticism draws for its rules and regulations. St. Basil also established the first hospital in the world near the gates of Caesarea, the city where he was bishop. It is for all of this and much more that he is remembered in the Church today as St. Basil the Great. Another of the Cappadocian Fathers, St. Gregory of Nazianzus, because of his abundant spiritual life, which led him to produce some of the clearest and most meaningful statements in Trinitarian theology, including during his time presiding over the latter part of the Second Ecumenical Council, is remembered by the Church today as St. Gregory the Theologian, one of only 3 individuals to whom the Church has granted this title. At the same time that St. Athanasius, the Cappadocian Fathers, and others were defeating Arianism within the Roman Empire and most surrounding regions, Arianism unfortunately established itself in the region in which it would see its most major expansion, amongst the Goths and other Germanic tribes in northern Europe. A bishop and missionary named Ulfilas was ordained and dispatched by Eusebius of Nicomedia, one of the leaders of the Arians, to evangelize the Goths. He quickly gained a following amongst them and was able to convert many of them to Arianism. The Goths would remain Arians until their conversion to Orthodox Christianity in the 6th century. Ulfilas is also responsible for creating the Gothic alphabet in order to translate the scriptures from Greek into Gothic. The close of the 4th century also saw the birth and conversion to Orthodox Christianity of a man whose influence on Christian theology, especially in Western Europe, would be monumental. This man would be known to all subsequent generations of Christians as St. Augustine of Hippo. The writings he produced in the early half of the 5th century would be definitional in theology for the majority of those who call themselves Christians today.